Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. I am Sasha Cotton, the Executive Director at the National Network for Safe Communities. We're really excited about this National Gun Violence Awareness Month webinar focused on the relationship between community violence intervention and law enforcement in both of their efforts to reduce gun violence in cities across America. We are joined by some phenomenal panelists. And so without hesitation, I think we're going to jump in the interest of time. I am joined by some co-hosts here who have come together to present this webinar to you. So I will pass it to my friend and brother in the work, Anthony Smith.
Thank you, Sasha. Always good to be with you. And thank you for your leadership and the National Network for Safe Community Leadership on pulling us together. My name is Anthony Smith, and I'm the Executive Director with Cities United. And this is one of the most important and urgent conversations that we could be having at this time. It is really time for all of us on the front line to come together and work together in partnership, where we can really identify, engage, and support those who are most at risk of being impacted by gun violence. So this conversation for me is timely. This conversation for the field is timely. This conversation needs to continue happening so that we can better coordinate our resources and better coordinate our services so that we can support those who are most at risk, right? So for the folks who are doing CVI on the front line, understanding that they have a key role to play when we talk about what it really means to create public safety in community. While we also know that our police and our law enforcement partners have a role to play too. They're two separate roles, but they are part of the same ecosystem. So these kind of conversations and these kind of spaces are needed to be had not only on the national level, but in community, so that we can truly get to the root causes of what's causing the violence in our community and really solve those issues. But also not only that, create better pathways for those young men and women who are most at risk of being violent. So I'm thankful for the space, thankful for all of those who have said yes to joining this conversation, and for all of those who are listening. And so we are looking forward to a robust conversation around what it really means to bring both all of our different pieces of the public safety ecosystem together to address this issue that we all see as a public health crisis in our country. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our other co-host, Dr. Monique Williams, who is the CEO of the Care Balance Global, to bring remarks as well. Dr. Monique.
Good afternoon. I'm very excited to be here with you all as well. I'm just going to talk just briefly, right? Just kind of ground us in what we're talking about here, which is, community violence intervention and what this strategy actually is, right? And we know that it's the strategy that identifies individuals at the highest risk of being involved in violence. And then, we surround those individuals with intensive support, with credible relationships, and with life-saving resources. It's about intervening before or sometimes after, harm has happened. And it happens through trusted individuals who have deeply connected relationships to the communities that they serve. And so we know that the CVI work is rooted in a simple truth, right? Violence spreads, but we know that it can be stopped. And so we treat it like a public health crisis because we know that it is, right? It's predictable, it's preventable, and it's deeply connected to systemic inequities. And just like any other epidemic, right, we need both intermediate intervention and then long-term care. And so these are the systems that we end up setting up within our CVI ecosystems, but we know that it's not just, our frontline workers. This works best when it is inside of a system that then partners, especially with our city official leaderships and our law enforcement partners when we're talking about public safety overall. And so it's bigger than, just the mediation of a beef, right? It's a system of care that is being built amongst individuals who care all about the same goal, which is to ensure that we are reducing instances of violence. And so, as Anthony already stated, there are lanes for the work, but there are lanes where, the work actually crosses over. And so this is a critical conversation for a critical time. And so we're excited to have Perf here to talk about some of the research that they've done relative to law enforcement and the CVI space.
Thank you so much. We are so excited to be here. And as the speakers have said before us, this is such a timely topic. It's so important So my colleague Dustin Richardson and I are going to talk today. Mostly Dustin will be talking about our findings, but really briefly, I just wanted to say my name is Megan Cahill. I'm from the Police Executive Research Forum, also called PERF. For those of you who don't know, we are a police think tank and membership organization for police executives. We were founded in 1976. We're located in Washington, D.C. And our goal is to provide progress in policing. And we do that by conducting rigorous research. We provide technical assistance to police agencies, and we also try to keep our finger on the pulse of the most critical issues facing the field. So we do that through forums, through debates, through op-eds, et cetera. So I am the research director at PERF, and we are currently researching a number of different topics. In addition to our work on CVIs, we're looking at ERPOs, the extreme risk protection orders, and officer safety and wellness issues. But I just wanted to let you know who PERF was and kind of why we're here. And so we did a big study on the role of law enforcement in CVIs. We brought folks together to talk about it. Dustin led that work. My colleague Dustin led that work, and I'm going to hand it over to him now to introduce himself and to talk about the findings and the workshop that we had.
Yep. So I am Dustin Richardson. I'm a senior research associate at PERF and I've been there about 3 years. And for a big chunk of that time was working on this CVI project that I'll be speaking with you briefly today. And the reason for that work is, despite the general recognition of police as crime fighters, little is known about their involvement in CVIs. So we sought to understand the police role in these interventions. And that was a two-part study. The first part was a survey that went out to law enforcement agencies in the summer of 2023. And we followed that up with the workshop that Megan mentioned, and that was last spring. And the purpose of that survey was to understand law enforcement's knowledge of, support for, and involvement in CVIs. Our sample was primarily large agencies, so we surveyed PERF members and agencies with 150 or more sworn staff. Now, to be a PERF member, you have to have a 4-year degree and subscribe to a set of founding principles. I won't get into those, but the final sample had 226 respondents. And I'll touch on just a few key findings that I think highlight the appetite for CVIs within law enforcement. And the first is that 87% of our respondents expressed that they believe community stakeholders share responsibility for addressing violence in the community. So it shows that law enforcement at least thinks community should have some involvement in this issue. And we found that about 2/3 of our respondents were familiar with CVI initiatives, and just under half of them have participated in one. Most of that involvement began in 2020 or later, so this has been a more recent development in the profession. And of those that participated in a CVI, it was a little over 100 agencies. Just 2 of the respondents said that they would not participate in one again, and that was simply because of a lack of resources, not because they didn't agree with the mission or because they didn't think it was effective. It was a resource issue, which I think is often a common theme in this space. And of the agencies that have not participated in a CVI, only 13% of them said that they would be unwilling to do so. So about half have participated in a CVI, the half that haven't, most of them would be willing to do so. And with regard to their involvement, we asked them, would you prefer to lead the initiative, or rather have the agency lead the initiative, or to support a community group that led it? And half the sample said that they would prefer to support a community organization, and another 31% said that they had no preference. It was just 17% of our respondents who said that they had a preference to lead. So again, there's not only this appetite to participate in these initiatives, but also to follow the community's lead. And another key finding that we found, something that we were particularly interested in heading into the survey, was whether or not law enforcement would be willing to work with former offenders who often fill violence interrupter roles, and 80% of the sample says that they would be happy to do so. But those are just a few of the key findings from the survey. There are dozens of others related to these agencies' involvement in CVIs, And if you're interested, you can find those in the report, but I won't throw a bunch of numbers at you here. Instead, we'll get into the second part of the study, which was that workshop I mentioned. And so this was last spring, and it was one day. It was in person at PERP's office in DC, and we brought together about a dozen experts, excuse me, about a dozen experts across law enforcement and community space. And one of the panelists was none other than Chief Jacobson, who we have here with us this afternoon. And the goal of that workshop was to have these experts identify how law enforcement agencies can be effective partners in CVIs. And ultimately, what came of this meeting was a list of key considerations and recommendations for law enforcement leaders. And these spanned 4 main themes or domains. The first is organizational change. In other words, does your agency's culture support engagement in CVI initiatives? The next was implementation. In other words, is the agency prepared to do the work? Buy-in was also a key theme, and not just do officers buy into the work, but does the community buy into law enforcement's presence within a CVI? And lastly, and most relevant to what we'll discuss today, is partnerships. The experts identified a number of key recommendations related to this, and one of the main recommendations was to ensure that you have the appropriate partnerships in place. Agencies are, of course, going to want to work with respected community members and organizations in their community, and TTA providers or training and technical assistance providers such as the NNSC or the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform can also prove invaluable to agencies in the early stages. As for partnerships, the experts would also identified the value of agencies acknowledging past harms. CVI, at least law enforcement's involvement in CVI, is a promise to do things differently, right? And some agencies seek to do things differently because they acknowledge that traditional policing methods have caused harm. So acknowledging that publicly can go a long way within the community, especially if it's done by the agency's leader. And the last recommendation that I'll mention, which was certainly the most important and most definitely the most contentious, was information sharing. And the experts noted that it's important to establish parameters for information sharing early on. CVI work requires significant trust. And there's a lot of contention around whether information sharing should be a one-way or a two-way street. In other words, should agencies and their community partners share information freely among one another, or should that information only flow from law enforcement to the community side? And ultimately, each community is going to need to determine what works for them. What works in one community may not work in another. But some agencies have noted that they establish MOUs early on with community partners to set expectations up front and encourage accountability with one another. But again, I won't get into too much of the detail. All of this information, as well as the full survey results, are found in our recent report that was published online. And I'm happy to share those links in the chat, both to the full report and to a research brief that summarizes the report. But with that, I'll wrap things up and pass it back over to you, Sasha.
Hi, actually, I'm going to hop in. I'm Lori Owen. I'm the director of our strategies and interventions team here at the National Network for Safe Communities. Thank you so much for that, Dustin. I want to kind of hop into our panelists. We have Chief Karl Jacobson from New Haven, Connecticut. We have Assistant Chief Alice White from Golden Valley, Minnesota, and we have Deputy Chief Melron Kelly from Columbia. I want to just get into these questions. I also want to just thank everyone for being here. Hearing what Dustin was just talking about, Karl, Chief Jacobson. I've known Chief Jacobson for a very long time, and so forgive my informal chatter. So Chief Jacobson, can you share reflections about the brief from PERF? And we know you've been a champion of this work for a long time. what specific trends or events have shaped you or your agency's interest in doing CVI work?
I think we started doing this. First of all, I want to thank National Network and Perf for having me partake in this work, because I think it's extremely important. We cannot police our communities the way we used to police our communities, because the end result is negative. And this type of policing has really changed my career. I started doing it as a sergeant in 2013 under the National Network for Safe Communities, where we were doing group violence intervention. And even as far back then, we were telling our communities, hey, we were knocking on doors of people that are prior offenders and saying, we want you safe, alive, and out of jail. And in 2013, after being a cop for almost 15 years, this was different to me. And it was a different culture. And we were able to change the culture in the city of New Haven and really embrace this work. But it's changed over the years and shaped into CVI. And I think it's more effective now than it was before, with us just either being a co-lead or allowing other agencies to kind of lead the work and us providing the intelligence, but also going to those custom notifications or meeting with the community when we can. Just back up a little bit. I'm 29 years in law enforcement in 2 policing agencies. My first was East Providence, Rhode Island, where we just went around and answered 911 calls. And we didn't police very effectively. Then moving to New Haven, we had a great format of community policing, walking beats, reaching out to the community. They consider all of us community police officers. We're given phones by the department so we could interact with our community every day. But there were some things missing. And in 2011, we had the highest per capita rate of homicide, and we were like the second most deadly city in the country, and we're a city of only 135,000 people. So we had to do something different, and it was GVI at first and the national network, but it formed into CVI, which I would tell you is way more effective, using community members helping us do this work and basically providing them the information to move forward and do this work.
Thank you, Chief. We love that we are continuing to partner with you all in New Haven and that the work continues to succeed there in helping to keep communities safe. We're going to pivot over to Assistant Chief Alice White. Alice, I also know Miss Alice very well and have had the luxury of working with her, so excuse our informality. But AC White, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself, and then I'll hop into a question?
Sure. Thank you, Sasha, for having me and allowing me to participate in this extremely important conversation. Even thus far, it's already been rich to hear what other cities have done surrounding CVI. My name's Alice White. I currently work for the Golden Valley Police Department. It's, in my opinion, a smaller agency. Our full strength is 31 officers. I've been with this agency for the past 4 years. Prior to working for Golden Valley, I worked in Minneapolis Police Department for 18 years and came over to a smaller agency in 2021. My experience in Golden Valley or in Minneapolis with GVI or CVI, as it's called now, was mostly working with you, Sasha, and the Minneapolis Police Department. I won't get into my long resume with Minneapolis. I worked in a lot of different places within that agency, and I still do work closely with the city.
Thank you. And that kind of leads me into the question that we have for you, AC Alice, which is, can you talk a little bit about the work that you did do? I know you don't want to go into your resume, but you've been a PJ trainer and done so many things in partnership with community. Can you talk a little bit about that and share how you've balanced these approaches between traditional law enforcement roles and then working more collaboratively and in inclusive ways with community, particularly around GVI and CVI?
Sure. So I grew up in Minneapolis. That's my hometown. I grew up in the south side of Minneapolis. I was one of the children that we are interacting with right now, trying to prevent violence. So I have the connection to ultimately the streets of the city. And I have a relationship with people in the city. And I think my first lesson that I felt like was being brought from my experience of being a Minneapolis resident and then working on the Minneapolis Police Department was respected community leaders that the community considers a respected community leader may not be what law enforcement considers to be a respected community leader. And there has to be a way for law enforcement to connect with the person that the community considers respected, who might have a criminal history, but is no longer engaged in criminal behavior, and be able to move past that person's criminal history and work with them closely on engaging the community. And I think sometimes that can be a barrier in law enforcement, but especially if you don't have a connection to the city that you're working in. And so bringing those people that actually have a say so in the streets of the community that you're trying to protect and serve, and be able to work with them collaboratively in the law enforcement agency, sometimes that takes, a little bit of work of relationship building and helping law enforcement, pulling them along to say, hey, this person is going to help us regardless to their checkered past. They are doing something different and positive within their community, and we all need to be able to work together.
Thank you for that.
Deputy Chief Kelly, you've been an important voice on why CVI is an important part of the public safety ecosystem. I want to ask you a two-part question. First is, can you just talk a little bit about how your department has partnered with CVI workers and, the ways that you've been able to honor their independence and their leadership? And then also, thinking about, how we can best communicate and coordinate without kind of infringing on other people's work or, getting in other people's lanes.
Definitely. So thanks for having me. I'm a proud member of Perth. I'm kind of a cop nerd, so I'm always looking and seeing how I can borrow information. Melron Kelly, I'm the Deputy Chief of Police at the Columbia Police Department. Been the Deputy Chief since 2014, going into year 11. And absolutely proud to be a member of the Cities United Advisory Board. I went to a convening, quick story, in Philadelphia, and it absolutely changed my outlook on how we police others and what we need to do to help end the cycle of violence. What we did here in Columbia is it started with actually our mayor's office that created an office of violence prevention. And we looked at ways to kind of slow the tide of violence in certain areas of the city. And it grew out of that to our what we call now our Office of Neighborhood Safety. So we looked at 5 areas of concern for us, and that was collaboration, research, convening, outreach, and I think the other one was safety and engagement. How we could build this ecosystem with our community partners in a way that would be substantive to help us end the cycle of violence. Unfortunately, in the city of Columbia, most of our victims of violence and perpetrators are African American males of color. So far this year, we've had 48 people shot in our city of Columbia, 5 of those from last night. And of those 48, 44 of them are African American males. So that kind of tells you where we needed to focus our work. And in order to do that effectively and doing it in a way that made sense, we had to partner with some groups that non-traditionally we wouldn't work with. Gangs and Peace is one of them. You would have thought I was crazy if I told you 11 years ago I'd be having known gang members at my house for a barbecue to talk about ways that we can end cycles of violence in North Columbia. So you have to be, as a police executive, you absolutely have to be non-traditional, think outside the box, and you have to be really, really willing to take some punches. My officers and some of my police peers thought that we were losing our mind in the city of Columbia by going in this direction. But in my neighborhood of North Columbia, you don't run when you're right. And I felt like we were right in this approach. I still feel like we're right. And we're enjoying right at about a 48% decrease in violent crime in our city. Also, unfortunately, we're seeing that some of these partners that we're working with that are almost like members of the family have been defunded. They've been laid off in the last 2 to 3 weeks. And what I'm seeing now is just phenomenal from some of my partners. They pitched in and they're working for free. So now, again, as a police executive, I'm looking at ways to be bold and say, can we share some of our budget with some of these organizations? We may not be able to fund them fully, but we may be able to give them some type of stipend in order to let them do that work. We don't look over their shoulders. We share data with them, and we say, hey, we're having a problem in this end of the city with this group of males or this group of this gang. And they go out and do the work that matters, whether it's in the ER bay, talking to them after they've been shot to get them not to retaliate, or just going into the areas to do that work, to spend time with the kids before there becomes a cycle of violence. So non-traditional, being very bold, and be willing to stand to your city council or your mayor saying, hey, I have the largest budget in the city of Columbia, but we need to divert some of those funds away from enforcement to CVI work, and being bold enough to take the swings that come with it. We know that some of our politicians get elected on public safety, but public safety absolutely starts in those communities. It does not start at the Columbia Police Department. Again, totally crazy to say as a police chief, knowing that I need those funds for enforcement, but I'm telling you, it works, and we need to continually do that.
Thank you, AC Melron. Such meaningful and powerful words. I see getting shout out in the chat by folks who are fully agreeing with you. So folks, we're gonna open it up. We'd love for you all to include questions that you have for any of our panelists or about the report from PERF in the chat. And I'm gonna ask one final formal question of our panelists for any or all of you to answer. What advice would you offer to agencies that are considering working in CVI or beginning to start those kinds of partnerships, or maybe have just started? You know, hindsight is 2020. If there were words of wisdom or advice that you could offer agencies about how to best work in partnership with the community, and particularly on CVI initiatives, what would those words of wisdom be? And in no formal order, whoever would like to jump in with that first.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll start. You know, I think it takes a lot of patience. You're talking about changing a culture of policing that does need to be changed in a lot of areas, and inviting people in that we normally wouldn't. I think it was AC White who said it. Like, we're gonna trust people that were former gang members. We're gonna invite people in. We've done that by allowing people, either street outreach workers, credible messengers. There's a few pastors that had storied past. They're actually training in my academy. So my brand new officers are meeting them and learning from them. So when they see them on the street, oh, that was my academy instructor. And that's what it takes, because we're cops. And the hardest thing is getting your cops to understand that this works. You know, we started this in 2013, a form of it. You know, 11 years later, 12 years later, sometimes I still have problems with buy-in. So I would say that it takes strong leadership. I had an assistant chief when I was a sergeant who said, you're gonna go and do this. And I said, I'm gonna warn people. I want you safe, alive, and out of jail. And then if they mess up, I might have to arrest them. That doesn't make sense to me. And he's like, shut up, kid, just do it. And I did it, and it changed my entire career. I had gang members show up for the Board of prior gang members show up for the Board of Alders for my confirmation and speak highly of me and say, I'm alive today because this officer took time to offer me services instead of just lock me up. And that's what this is all about. And the relationships we built in New Haven, we have the youth department, the street outreach workers, Project Longevity, which is a nonprofit that kind of takes the lead on a lot of this stuff. We have an Office of Violence Prevention in our city. So I would say you have to build this infrastructure, but you have to get the cops to buy in. And it starts with a small number of trusted, respected officers. And I think that's why that assistant chief picked on me, because he knew if I went, the other cops would follow. And I guess they did, you know, because now 14 years later, I'm the chief for the last 3 years. So I would say, but also you have to be patient. It takes a lot of time to build those trusts.
AC White, DC Melron.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on Chief Jacobson. I think that the officers that you choose from your agency to spearhead these initiatives are extremely important. You want to choose someone who has a connection, who's open and flexible to the community that you're serving, and then you want to choose someone who's also respected by your agency. You know, when I have a short story when the 3rd precinct was given up during the protests surrounding the killing of George Floyd. I had violence interrupters show up, and my staff and I were standing on the line very last. And so we see all these former gang members and people who we've known as being, you know, quote unquote criminals in the community. And they walked up and turned and faced the crowd and protected our officers from the riots and from people that were throwing things at us. And that's how that that's one of the ways that I knew the relationship had been formed, that these violence interrupters showed up to protect the officers. And so having that type of relationship built and that trust, it does take some time, but that was the wonderful outcome of spending the time of building those relationships.
I think for us in Columbia, and I tell my young officers this, when we put on a uniform, we wear the history that comes with it. And that history hadn't always been kind to the citizens in the city of Columbia traditionally. It may not have been them directly, but it may have been their grandparent or uncle or aunt. So for us, it came with an acknowledgement that policing wasn't always done the best way traditionally, but we were here to reestablish relationships. We were here to say that we're here to help and really mean it and give a care about it. And that acknowledgement went a long way with some of our traditional neighborhoods that had frayed relationships with policing. And now we're seeing those returns on investment, like Assistant Chief said, when we had our riots, when we had our tense officer-involved shooting situations, that trust that was built, and we can always do better, goes a long way, but you can't do it on the eve, post-eve of something happening. You have to do it every day, every single time you go out. And it's hard to get that spread through an agency, but you got to do it every day. It has to be something that's in the way you walk and talk as a police executive, and it'll spread.
Thank you. So we are getting some questions that are popping up in the chat. And this one is actually for you, Chief Kelly. What percentage of the public safety budget in Columbia goes to CVI, or can you talk a little bit about how it's funded?
Yeah, so what we did was we carved out a portion of our budget, and I don't want to say it's over 30%, for our Office of Neighborhood Safety. It used to be the Office of Violent Crime. So some of the city's budget went to that, and they also got some grant funding as well to do that. And I can get you exact numbers, but what we did was carve out some of our budget, go to the Office of Neighborhood Safety, and Director Trayvon Fordham. It's totally separate from the police department, but some of our funding did go that way. But we collaborate with them daily.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say we've been in, operating for so long. Our project longevity, which our major coordination piece, is funded by the state fully. So we have that luxury. And then the Office of Violence Prevention from the city is funded separate than my budget. But I agree with Chief Kelly. If we needed to, we could find some money. We were just proclaimed a sanctuary city by Trump, so we are losing some funding, and we know our partners have lost some funding. So we're running into those same problems. And I'll tell you, next year's budget, if I need to carve a piece out, I'm going to do what I can to keep this system working, because I know it works. The chief mentioned 48 shootings. I'm normally at about 30, 35. We have 8 so far this year. So this work is full throttle, and we're doing a lot of great work, and we can't do it without our partners. And I'm lucky because I have state funding that helps us, and I have the mayor behind it on the Office of Violence Prevention. But if I were to need to pull into my budget, I would.
That's great. That's awesome.
That's so good to hear.
You can have some questions. Over to you, Lori, if you've got one. Sure.
I was just going to ask about your local unions. How have they responded to these initiatives? So some folks find that there's some hostility around kind of this work that's driven by the union leadership. So have you faced that? And if so, how have you managed it?
We don't have unions in South Carolina. That is foreign to me. We're a right to work state. I pick with my friends in the northern states about the issue.
Be lucky, sir. Be lucky, because my union's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, that is totally foreign to me.
Yeah. So I would say the union will pick on us if we don't have a good contract. So my first 2.5 years as chief, we didn't have a contract. So they picked on everything, including this type of work. But really, they had we had done it for so long. It wasn't a change in work. It wasn't anything that they could formally grieve. So we've been lucky about that. But I would say that, everything's about timing. You need to kick this off. We have just signed a new contract with a the officers are getting paid a lot more. They're getting extra days off. We're taking care of their mental health and wellness. And I think that's important too. And that's your pushback to the union. Listen, I'm taking care of my cops. This is going to save lives because community and police and the population that is committing crimes gets closer under this, gets really close. They get to know each other. We go to your house with Project Longevity members, with street outreach workers. So you know these cops, and it's less likely for these officers to shoot somebody they know or the people to shoot an officer that they know. So in the way I've defined it to them is we're safer by doing this, and that's kind of work. They haven't picked anything specific. But like I said, without a contract, they were picking on everything.
And then for us, like the contract or the collective bargaining agreement, it includes like you can be directed by the chief to do community engagement work. So there's nothing to grieve. We haven't had any issues.
Thank you all for that. So one of the questions that comes in the chat from Courtney Thomas is, what are some of the training topics that are covered in the academy from community? Or how is, I'm assuming that you also want to know how is CVI maybe covered? And if so, is it covered? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, since I mentioned it, I'll start. We have a whole de-escalation under the Kingian philosophy, which is Martin Luther King principles, set up by one of our reverends who brings in community members. They basically teach the history of Martin Luther King, a lot of Black history, our community's history. They integrate it with history of our own community in New Haven, and then they have de-escalation principles. So it's really a fantastic program. All our cadets go through it. We're starting to roll it out on in-service as well. So that's one of the things. And then we also cover through our Project Longevity partners, we cover how group violence intervention and CVI works from the people that do it with us. So they'll come into our academy, talk to our cadets on a regular basis and kind of start building those relationships and putting that into their minds as they, just like they're taught everything else in policing. And I think that's important too. You need to get these principles started right in the beginning of their career.
Right. We use PERF's ICAT training as one of our foundations of training. All police officers in South Carolina go to a state academy, but prior to them going there, we have a little pretty basic academy we call Basic Candidacy School, where we teach it the Columbia Police Department way, and ICAT is one of the foundational training partners that we use on our platform. But what we did post George Floyd was institute some policies that we felt would help in the CVI work, and that was the duty to intervene, the duty to render aid, and the duty to de-escalate. And each one of those policy implementation points brought with it how we can work better with the community, from intervening to rendering aid to de-escalating was built around how we can work best with our community. We had officers that were using force and not rendering aid. We had officers that lost their cool on a call and the other officer ramped it up. So now it's written that you will de-escalate. If your partner is losing his or her cool, you will intervene. If we use force, you will render aid, and you could lose your job for it. I don't have to go through a union. I can terminate because someone violated a policy. But you have to be very intentional, very substantive about how well we want to work with the community. But at the same time, on the enforcement piece, once you dig into the data, because that's a part of it, there's only a small segment of the population that we're dealing with that we're actually putting in jail and removing from society. The others we can work with. And that's not always marketed media, or that's not always what the paper talks about. But we know as in law enforcement, the chiefs can tell you, there's only a small segment of the population that's really raising all the hell, excuse my language.
So for us, my experience has been mostly implementing procedural justice, and that's the concept of voice, neutrality, respect, and trustworthiness. That's the foundation of law enforcement for this agency and for the Minneapolis Police Department that I formerly worked with. And then also our city does city initiatives. So it's not solely based on what we're teaching people in the academy. The expectation for this current city, Golden Valley, is these initiatives, equity, DEI, de-escalation, it's from the top down, from the city management, all throughout the entire departments, throughout the entire city, because we're using this as a foundation of how we treat each other internally is going to impact how we serve the community in each of our own siloed agencies. So again, de-escalation, like Chief Kelly was saying, and procedural justice, and then using the 21st century policing model to guide us.
So we have a question from Dr. Londale Town Senior, and the judicial question has been one that I feel like has come up a lot. So I'm going to ask it. What does the relationship with the judicial system look like, and how much of this program's success relies on judges and legislators?
I would say first, when we first started, we had no backup from the judges and legislators, and we fought with these different concepts, and we were able to survive without it. You know, whether that be giving a break to somebody that's turned their life around, or it be, hey, they've been offered several chances and they still picked up a gun and shot somebody, right? So there's two folds to that. And we really had zero support, but it's become part of our culture. It's become part of what we do. We integrate this with Intel meetings and our other agencies, as well as the state's attorney's office and the U.S. attorney's office. The U.S. attorney's office and the state's attorney's office are now fully behind this type of policing. So we do have that support. But I would say, again, it took a long time for them to even acknowledge that we were doing something different. You know, they were like, we don't care about any of this. We're just gonna, give somebody a sentence the way we feel that should be done. And until we kind of did more trainings and more communication, it just takes a long time. It took us a very long time.
So my experience with the
Go ahead.
judicial system in the state of Minnesota has been a little bit different. When you think about law enforcement and the history of law enforcement, I always refer to like the pendulum. So the criminal justice system used to be way over here and overly prosecute, and it had extremely harsh repercussions through the judicial system. And now in the state of Minnesota, it's totally went to the other side, where there's hardly any accountability and very little prosecution when we really should be trying to get in the middle. And so that people know that there is consequences when you break a law and you've done something criminal, but it's not going to be so harsh that, statistics are showing that, especially young Black men are being overly prosecuted, but also these young Black men or these young juveniles who are committing crimes aren't having any accountability or any repercussions for their behavior. So I'm kind of waiting for the pendulum to get into the middle.
Yes, getting the pendulum into the middle, I think, is one of the challenges. We want a balanced system. And so it's something that we work on at the National Network for sure, because we have the opportunity to work with USAs and prosecutors and judges, and we've got some huge champions. And so as I'm listening to this conversation, it is making me think about another webinar topic that perhaps we should have the judiciary, some judges, some prosecutors come on and talk about their perspectives and how they've worked in some of these capacities. So great conversation. We have about 15 minutes left. I think there's a couple of comments and maybe a question that I'm trying to get to in this comments. But I want to also make sure that I'm making room for our co-host, Dr. Williams and Anthony, to ask any questions they have. And I see Anthony's got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you for that, Doctor. This has been a good conversation. I want to go back to the data sharing that I heard earlier. And folks were talking about how they shared data and what that data looks like. And how did you all get to that process? And how did you get to a place where folks got okay with you all sharing the data that needs to be shared with the CVI outreach workers?
I think for us.
Go ahead.
Oh, good. Chief.
So I think, again, that took a long time for my people to buy in, but it took like me as a sergeant back then saying I was the one that shared the information, right? And I think police have to share 100% one way, and that's it. Now, if there is a return, well, that's a bonus. but we don't look for a return. We look for, hey, we're telling you what's going on with Johnny and Jimmy because we want you to help us keep them out of this, you know, whether it be a retaliatory thing or whatever. And again, it took a while for our people's buy-in, and so that it wasn't just me doing all the talking and sharing with street outreach. And we've come to a different place in our city through the leadership doing it and then continuing. But the most important part for your partner side is you can't expect anything from them, especially newer people coming into the work. Like our street outreach program, the major one is CTVIP, and CTVIP's come a long way, and they just brought some newer members on. And at that point, you know, we went to a meeting and we're sharing our information as a police department, and the guy's like, they're just telling us this stuff? I'm like, yeah, I don't want anything in return. But I'll tell you, 10 years down the road, you get something in return, right? You get a lot more than you could ever expect, but it has to be one way. And we have to share as much as physically possible to not hurt a case, but you know, I even have detectives. I'll say, hey, is this going to hurt if we share this? Then we're sharing it. You know what I mean? Because it's about saving that next life, right? Yes, we want to solve a case. Yes, we want to solve a shooting or a murder, but it's about saving the next life that could be involved in this, and you got to share that information.
Thank you for that, Chief. Before you jump in, DC Kelly, Chief, you say it takes a time. Can you give folks like a kind of a timeline of what they should be looking for? That's why I've heard you say it takes time. Can you help folks think about like what the time frame they should be thinking about this trust and these relationships building?
That's tough. I'll tell you real quickly. Years ago, we had a murder in front of our street outreach workers, and nobody talked to the police. So when I came on, that relationship was toast. So it took a long time to rebuild that relationship. I mean, the guys that would bring it up years later, they weren't even on the job at the time. So it depends on where you are and what's going on, but I think you gotta just consistently do it, and it turns around. It turns around not only the officers and how they look at the rest of the community and everything that's going on in your city. It also turns around the street outreach workers to say like, hey, these aren't bad people. They just want, you know. It's when you sit at that table and everybody realizes, hey, they just want us to be safe, and we want to, you know, everybody wants to be safe, you know, and everybody deserves to be safe. And I can't give you a timeline. It depends on what's going on in the area or what has gone on in the past. But it's real crucial for the police side to be 100% honest and give as much information as they can to kind of win over the people it's more important for us to win over you than vice versa, right?
Thank you for that, Chief.
Sasha, were you about to say something? Okay. There's a whole lot that we can unpack even just here, and we'll probably do some more unpacking. But kind of along the same lines of, the issues of trust and the fact that these things have to be built. And when you're implementing a system like this, I know, we get questions about this a lot, and I just, want you guys to answer it. But how do you all handle situations where, right, an incident is happened or something may be escalating, right? And then you have law enforcement show up and you have CVI workers that show up. And CVI workers are requesting space, right, to do what they do. How do you get to a point of determining, the system of who should respond or whether or not an officer can back away and let CVI do the work that they do, right, so that there doesn't have to be an arrest or even an escalation in a situation?
For us in Columbia, those conversations have to take place before there's an incident. We have scenarios, we have tabletop where we talk about, well, what's going to happen if we have a shooting and we're both there. Sometimes, and the chief knocked it out of the park. The hardest thing for me to do was to tell my CVI workers that I'm having a problem in South Columbia and something's brewing. And I give them the area or the streets where it may happen or the names I'm hearing. And they come back and say, they're not going to shoot up that street. Don't worry about it. Well, the cop in me wants to know who is going to shoot it up. What's their name? What time? It's our instinct, right? But we had to say, trust them. And that's a big word, trust them, and know that it's not going to happen. And when it didn't materialize, it just built a little bit more trust. But I would say as you're building out your CVI structure, there are going to be situations and scenarios that you need to play in a room to see how it's going to work out. And there will be times where the scene isn't safe for them to come in. You have to be willing to say, hey, you can't come right now, but as soon as we get things calmed down, I'm going to invite you in. We can go in together and we can knock on doors and make sure everyone's okay. But just having that clear line of communication helps a lot, because tensions are high, emotions are high, especially on some scenes. You have to be willing to have that open line of communication. And as things die down, there's time that law enforcement needs to pull back and let them do their work, because they do better work when we're not around.
Thank you for that. So we have one last question in the chat, and then we'll move into some closing statements. And that last question is, do you all accept CVI referrals from the community members? And if so, how do they share that information with you all? Happy to have any of you.
That's a great question. Typically when I'm working with CVI agency or someone that's a community member, I put out an RFP, a request for proposal, for people to or groups to say that they're interested in doing this type of work for this particular city. And there's usually someone who vets the people who work for them. And so if a community member were interested in participating, I would refer them to the actual CVI group that I'm working with for that particular initiative.
Yeah, and I think we do it as well. Like, people can reach out to our Office of Violence Prevention or our Project Longevity, which is a nonprofit that does a lot of this work. We also have our Office of Violence Prevention has quarterly community meetings that are advertised, and we have a good turnout from the community to say, what else can we as the Office of Violence Prevention, the police, whoever else that's in the room, all the partners in the room, what can we do? We're trying to hear from the community. What can we do to help reduce gun violence from the community? And we go around to all the different areas of the community. And at that point, we do get information like, hey, somebody's come back in the community and they're at risk and whatnot. So I would say having open community meetings around this stuff, like when we launched it, we had a ton of community meetings back in 2013. But I think you need to continuously have community-based meetings talking about this stuff. And at first, nobody shows up. But then eventually people start to show up, and you got to have them in the right places and bring along the right community members to help bring those people in to give you suggestions.
Melron, any thoughts before we pivot? No pressure. All right, well, we are going to transition to some closing statements, and I want to make sure that the last voices you hear from are our panelists. But before we go into that, I want to just thank everyone so much for being here. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I think it has created more opportunity for these kinds of convenings with governmental partners, whether that be law enforcement, prosecutors, or judges. So be on the lookout for some future webinars on this topic. We at the National Network, our slogan is the power of partnership, and this is truly a demonstration of that. We are partnering with law enforcement, CVI, and the community at large to bring together opportunities to decrease violence in community using group violence intervention and other strategies to make that happen. So thank you all so much. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give us some closing remarks so that we can let folks get back to other activities around Gun Violence Prevention Month. So ladies first, AC White.
Again, thank you for having me. This was a really rich conversation. I definitely gained some things from the other two chiefs on the panel, and the well thought out questions from the people who are attending. For me, getting into law enforcement was, I didn't know what GVI was or CVI was. I just knew that I wanted to help protect and serve and prevent violence in my community. So now that there's a name to it of the foundational values that I came into law enforcement with, it's amazing. And it's amazing to see that it's being spread from, one officer's foundational values to now it's becoming expectations of entire police departments. And I think this is how law enforcement should be, and we're seeing that it's working, and I'm really excited to see how it continues to move forward.
Either gentleman, equal playing fields. Say what you'd like. Either chief. Close us.
Yeah, I just appreciate this. Thank you so much. Lori knows. Lori sent me around the country with the National Network to talk at all different policing agencies. Years ago, I was in Minneapolis. I think, AC White, I think I met you then. Like, it's starting to come back to me. And, you know, it's been my passion because I know it's the right thing to do. And Lori will remember this. In 2017, 2018, I said, hey, how many agencies really do this stuff? And she was like, 25, 26. And I was very disheartened by that because this is the right way to police, especially with everything that's going on in this country. And we were doing it before George Floyd, way before in 2013. But especially with everything that's going on in this country, to give people opportunities and to tell them, as a police agency, we want you safe, alive, and out of jail. There's no better way. And we in New Haven go along with that concept. We need the consent of the community to police them. They have to believe in us as good people who want the best outcomes. And this type of policing helps you do that. So I would just say it's been a game changer in New Haven. We also wrote this all into our policies and procedures because, you know, I might not be chief someday, and then who's going to pick up the torch? So we've trained younger sergeants and lieutenants. They're all doing it. But also we wrote it into our policies and procedures. And I think that's important because this type of work has to continue. And, you know, it all started at the National Network. And I thank them for getting us started. And it's been a game changer. And we're saving lives. So thank you.
Thank you again to my fellow panelists. I learned a lot today, and some things I'm going to borrow from a couple of y'all. But I just know that this work works, but slowly is the fastest way to get to where we want to be. So I would just caution that if any city is trying to implement CVI work, do it slowly and intentionally. And you can't go all in very quickly, but you will see the results of the work. In just under 2 years, we're seeing that 47% decrease that I'm seeing in violent crime. I would have loved to stand up as a police chief or assistant chief to take credit for that drop, right? Absolutely not. That was all inclusive of the work that our partners are doing and some community members even to see those decreases in crime. But this work works. But as an executive, a police executive, a chief, a deputy chief, we have to be intentional about saying to the community, we want to save lives, even the lives of people that don't know that they need to be saved. But you have to do it in your work. You have to do it in how you benchmark with your officers and your staff to know that we're all in and all inclusive in doing this work. And I would just like to say that whatever we can do here in the city of Columbia, and I don't know if I can speak for my colleagues, I think we're all willing to do what we can to help share that information and help you get started if we need to. So thank y'all for having me, and let's work together to see these continual decreases in crime and replicate what works in different cities as well. So I thank y'all.
Thank y'all so much. It is 12:59, so we're giving folks back 30 seconds or so of your day. We appreciate you. Please continue to lift up the issue of gun violence prevention today and all month and all year and always. We thank you for your work. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Take care and be safe. Bye-bye.